interview kids and listen to their voices and raise up their voices so that we have a say in what happens in our future.
Journalism isn't just an after-school activity for you ladies. Is this your life's work?
I would definitely say it's some of the most meaningful work I've ever done. And just to tag on young people starting to care more, it's easy to say that not caring about politics or not wanting to be aware is a privilege. And at Parkland, a lot of us describe our community as a bubble. And after what happened, it just gave us all a firsthand experience that you have to care because your lives depend on it.
Thank you so much for your work. Congratulations on being here in New York today, and obviously the Pulitzer mention. You can read more of the Eagle Eye's reporting both during the tragedy and in the aftermath in their book, We Say Never Again. Talk about some extraordinary young people. That wraps us up this hour. I'm Stephanie Ruhle. I'll see you again at 1 p.m. with Ali Velshi.
He was seemingly preoccupied with the possible 2020 rival, Joe Biden, the former vice president. He kicked off this trip with that tweet about Biden initially and then doubled down on it, essentially, did not back away from it in a news conference here in Tokyo. That has drawn some backlash from not just Democrats like Mayor Pete Buttigieg, for example, but from Republicans. Congressman Adam Kinzinger, Congressman Pete King, for example, overnight tweeted about this as well, essentially slamming the president for seeming to side with the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un over the former vice president, an American citizen, obviously. This is something President Trump was pressed on by my White House press corps colleague, Jeff Mason, a friend of this show, by the way, who asked the president specifically about that. Watch.
I can tell you that Joe Biden was a disaster. His administration with President Obama, they were basically a disaster when it came to so many things, whether it was economy, whether it was military defense, no matter what it was. They had a lot of problems. So I'm not a fan.
So what is that about? There are some raising the question of why is it that Donald Trump, even here in Tokyo, as he has had 4 days with a close friend, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan, has the president been tweeting so much and talking so much about Joe Biden? Is it because Biden is in his head ahead of the 2020 election? We know that folks in and around the White House, folks close to President Trump, do believe that Biden is a formidable threat to the president if you were to make it through the Democratic primary, and that is still a big if. We should also note here, you mentioned North Korea. Yeah, very sharp split, not just with any key U.S. ally, but with his host here in Japan, Shinzo Abe. President Trump dismissing the idea that North Korea's recent missile tests violate United Nations Security Council resolutions. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe did not dismiss that. Neighboring Japan, of course, concerned about these missile tests. Even the president's own top aide, National Security Advisor John Bolton, had some daylight, a lot of daylight with the president on this one, Jeff.
That's a great point. Let's bring in our panel now because, Betsy, I want to read for you the big headlines coming out of this trip. You have Politico. Trump finds himself increasingly alone on North Korea. The New York Times. Japan rolled out the red carpet. Trump veered off into personal fixations. And then there's this from the Washington Post. Still angling for a deal. Trump backs Kim Jong-un over Biden, Bolton, and Japan. So, Betsy, it's hard to see how this is what the White House was hoping to get out of this trip.
The central fact that helps make sense of the way President Trump talks about Kim Jong-un is that he organizes his foreign policy in large part based on the personal relationships that he has with foreign heads of state. Trump believes that Kim Jong-un likes him. He believes the two of them have a rapport, and he believes that that basic personal relationship could lay the foundation for a legacy item in his presidency. However, it's not something that the people around him put a particularly high level of confidence in. And that's where we get sort of this bifurcation within the White House, within the Trump administration, and between Trump and our key allies, including Japan. While Trump himself seems to have great faith in his personal rapport with Kim Jong-un, that faith is not widely shared whatsoever. And that's the reason for sort of this strange and apparently perplexing tension when it comes to the North Korean issue.
Right. And Betsy, could it be that the president is also trying to preserve his talking point heading into 2020, that his big gambit on North Korea worked?
For sure, there's no question. We know that Trump views himself as the consummate deal maker. He thinks that he can negotiate deals where nobody else was able to. He takes great personal pride in the fact that he may be able to get some sort of progress on denuclearization that his predecessors were not able to get. This is really personally important to him, and that's part of the reason that he's treating this issue in a way that generates so much head scratching in other corners.
Eugene, let's talk about Joe Biden, because the former VP, he didn't respond to any of the president's remarks or tweets, but some of his Democratic rivals defended him instead, including Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Take a look at this.
Jong-un is a murderous dictator, and the Vice President Biden serves this country honorably. It's just one more example, though, of the way that this president tries to draw attention to himself by saying things that shock the conscience.
So, Eugene, what's your take on all of this?
Well, I think someone like Pete Buttigieg, who has foreign policy experience, been considering his time abroad in military involvement and other academic pursuits, is trying to paint a perspective for the people who are considering him as well as Joe Biden. And we know that quite a few of these individuals are people who tried Trump in 2016 and perhaps are looking for another alternative. And they want to make sure that these individuals know that what they could be doing in backing Trump for a second time could make things even more difficult for America in terms of foreign policy, and make things difficult for America in terms of its relationships with other countries not even involved in the conversations between Japan, North Korea, and the U.S. I think what ultimately President Trump is doing is really hurting himself.
Multi-billion-dollar disaster that we're in the middle of and not over with yet.
I mean,
it's like, yes, we can't even add up at this point how many houses have been lost between the tornadoes and the flooding. And the flooding is going to be astronomical, and it's not done yet. So let me get into a little bit of it. And let's recap first what happened last night. 51 tornado reports. The one we just showed you where Gabe was standing was right here near Dayton. That was what went through about 10 to 11 o'clock last night. But there were 51 tornadoes yesterday, and we could be something similar today. The one that went through Dayton that destroyed that elementary school, which, you think, the end of this school year, no way, but they may not even get back into that school in time for next school year. This is the tornado. You can see it right here. Here's the little V notch down in here. They call this like a stovepipe tornado. And I've seen some of those trees where the leaves were just stripped, the branches were stripped off. The only thing that was left was the trunk and some of the main stems of the tree. Usually that's like an EF3 or EF4. The tornado scale goes from 0 to 5, 5 being the strongest. So this was a pretty strong one. So for today, we just got the new update for the severe weather expected today. In the Northeast, watch out. Pittsburgh all the way through Harrisburg to Philadelphia to New York City, all the way back down to Baltimore, almost to Washington, D.C. We could even see an isolated tornado or two. 28 million people at risk. And then look back in the Midwest. We now are up to a moderate risk. There's a good chance of not only tornadoes, but strong tornadoes in areas from Kansas City to St. Joseph here, from Columbia northwards up into southern portions of Iowa. We have to watch this closely later on this evening. 20 million people at risk in this area here. So in total, we're up to like 44 million people in about 14 different states just for today alone. And, of course, if we get all these thunderstorms, we're going to get more rain, too. And then tomorrow, we do it again from Dallas to Fort Worth, all the way over through Fort Smith. And the Fort Smith area and Tulsa has been hit so hard with all the river flooding, day after day of thunderstorms. It's making things worse. Here's your flash flood alert. 6 million people at this. And, Jeff, I'll leave it with this map. This map here shows us all the major rivers that are having a considerable record or close to record flood stage, including the Mississippi, the Missouri, the Arkansas, and the Illinois River here. This map shows us another 3 to 6 inches of rainfall on top of those rivers. And so it's a nightmare scenario. Yeah. The dams can't hold any more water. Levees are going to start failing. And there's no end in sight.
Bill Cairns, thank you. And Gabe Gutierrez in Ohio, thanks to you both. We've got some breaking news for you now out of the Supreme Court, where the justices have addressed the issue of abortion. NBC Justice correspondent Pete Williams is at the court. Pete, what's this about?
This involves an Indiana law passed in 2016 and signed by Mike Pence when he was then the governor. The Supreme Court upheld part of it today, but invalidated part of it, or at least left lower court rulings that invalidated part of it. The Supreme Court's action today allows the law to take effect that deals with the remains, how remains of fetal tissue are disposed of. The state law says they can't be disposed of like medical waste. They have to be treated like any other person, cremated or buried. The second provision, that provision of the law will go into effect. The second provision would have prohibited abortions when a woman is told by her doctor that it's a virtual certainty that her child would have some severe disability or Down syndrome. That part of the law is invalidated. Planned Parenthood had said if it had gone into effect, it would basically compel a woman to deliver a child when it was likely to die in infancy. So a split decision, part of the law upheld, part of it struck down. Back to you.
Pete Williams at the Supreme Court, thank you for that. Still a lot more to cover this morning.